The day I found the letter was the day I stopped being Eleanor Morgan, family disappointment. It was tucked inside an old leather-bound journal, yellowed with age and smelling faintly of my grandmother's rose perfume. I'd been cleaning out her cottage after the funeral, the last duty assigned to me, the least successful grandchild. My brother, James, was too busy with his surgical practice to help, and my sister, Victoria, was preparing for another charity gala with her investment banker husband. "Just box everything up for donation, Ellie," my mother had said with that familiar sigh of resignation. "There's nothing valuable there anyway." I'd heard that sigh my entire life, when I dropped out of law school to pursue photography, when I broke up with the accountant they'd practically handpicked for me, when I moved into a tiny apartment in the unsafe part of town because it was all I could afford. Always the sigh, followed by a look exchanged with my father that said, "What did we do wrong with this one?" The journal had been hidden in a false bottom of Grandma Ruth's antique writing desk, the one piece of furniture I'd always loved. I was going to ask if I could keep it, not that anyone would object to me taking the least valuable item in the house, when my fingers found the catch and the hidden compartment opened. Inside was the journal and a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For Eleanor, when the time is right." My hands trembled as I broke the seal, unfolding the pages covered in my grandmother's elegant script. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I've failed in my promise to tell you this truth in person. Forgiveness is what I seek, though I may not deserve it. You've lived your life feeling like an outsider in your own family, and now you must know why. You were not born a Morgan. 30 years ago, at Meadowbrook General Hospital, 2 baby girls were born on the same night, you and another child. Whether by terrible mistake or deliberate action, you were switched. The daughter born to me and your grandfather, the child of Patricia and Robert Morgan, went home with another family. And you, my precious girl, came home with us. I discovered the truth when you were 5 years old. A nurse from the hospital contacted me, racked with guilt over something she'd witnessed. She claimed it was no accident. She claimed someone had been paid to switch the infants, a deliberate act meant to change the course of more lives than just yours. You are the daughter of Elizabeth and Richard Blackwood. The page blurred as tears filled my eyes. Blackwood. The name wasn't familiar, yet it sent a shiver down my spine. The Blackwoods were among the wealthiest families in the state. Old money, vast holdings, and a family legacy stretching back generations. Elizabeth was their only child, the sole heir to the Blackwood fortune. She and Richard died in a plane crash when you were just 3 months old, never knowing their true daughter had been stolen from them. Their estate, your birthright, was estimated at over $100 million. It should have passed to you, their only child. Instead, without a direct heir, it went to Richard's cousin, Martin Blackwood, a man I believe orchestrated your very disappearance from your rightful family. I've spent decades gathering evidence, hiring private investigators, trying to build a case strong enough to go public. But Martin's influence runs deep. The statute of limitations on many of the crimes has expired, and my own complicity in keeping this secret has made coming forward complicated. I was a coward, Eleanor. I feared what would happen to our family if the truth came out. Your mother, Patricia, had suffered multiple miscarriages before you. When the nurse approached me with her suspicions, Patricia was finally happy. I couldn't bear to shatter her world, to take you away from her. And selfishly, I couldn't bear to lose my granddaughter, even if you weren't mine by blood. So I stayed silent, watching you grow up, questioning why you never seemed to fit, why your interests and talents were so different from the rest of the family. I told myself I was protecting you, but as the years passed, I realized I was only protecting myself and the family that had inadvertently stolen you. In my desk, behind this letter, you'll find a key to a safe deposit box at First National Bank. Inside is everything I've gathered over the years. DNA test results confirming you are not biologically related to us, the nurse's sworn affidavit before she died, photographs, documentation of the Blackwood estate, and the name of the private investigator who has helped me all these years. He knows to expect your call upon my death. The choice of what to do with this information is yours. You may decide the love of the family who raised you matters more than the fortune that was stolen from you. Or you may choose to claim what is rightfully yours and expose those who robbed you of your birthright. Whatever you decide, know that my love for you was never a lie. Blood or not, you were the light of my life, Eleanor. I only wish I'd had the courage to give you the truth sooner, to help you fight this battle while I was still by your side. With eternal love and deepest regrets. Grandma Ruth. I sat on the dusty floor of the cottage for hours, reading and rereading the letter until the words burned themselves into my mind. My entire identity had been a lie. The constant feeling of being different, of not belonging, it hadn't been in my head. I literally was not a Morgan. The safe deposit key felt heavy in my palm. Small and brass, innocuous-looking, yet it held the power to shatter my world even further. I should have called my family immediately. Should have confronted my parents with this incredible revelation. Instead, I carefully refolded the letter, tucked it into my pocket along with the key, and finished packing up the cottage as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just discovered I was the rightful heir to $100 million fortune. As if I hadn't learned my entire life had been stolen from me. The First National Bank was housed in an imposing granite building downtown, its marble floors and soaring ceilings designed to make ordinary people feel small. I'd been in the bank once before, accompanying my father as he transferred funds from my grandparents' account after my grandfather's death. I remembered how the bank manager had fawned over him, the respect in his voice when he said, "Dr. Morgan." No one fawned over me as I approached the teller and presented the key and my ID. "I need to access this safe deposit box," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The teller, a young woman with immaculately manicured nails, examined the key. "Box 447. Let me get a manager to assist you." Minutes later, I was following a balding man in a charcoal suit through a heavy door and into a room lined with metal boxes. He located 447, inserted his key alongside mine, and with a soft click, the box opened. "Take your time, Ms. Morgan. Just press the button by the door when you're finished." Alone with the contents of my grandmother's secret investigation, I felt a momentary hesitation. Opening this box meant there was no going back. But I'd spent 30 years feeling like a failure, an aberration, a disappointment. I needed to know who I really was. The box was nearly full. I carefully lifted out folder after folder, laying them on the table provided. The labels were meticulous, in Grandma Ruth's precise handwriting. Hospital records, DNA analysis, Nurse Jensen's statement, Blackwood family history, financial documentation, surveillance reports. The last item in the box was a sealed envelope labeled PI contact information. I opened this first. I committed the information to memory, then turned to the folders, starting with hospital records. Inside were photocopies of birth certificates, hospital bracelets, and staff schedules from Meadowbrook General for the night of my birth. 2 baby girls, born 27 minutes apart. Eleanor Morgan, 6 pounds 8 ounces, born to Patricia and Robert Morgan at 11:42 p.m. Catherine Blackwood, 6 pounds 10 ounces, born to Elizabeth and Richard Blackwood at 12:09 a.m. The DNA folder contained the results of tests my grandmother had somehow obtained. Hair samples, cheek swabs, all confirming what the letter had claimed. I shared no genetic markers with the Morgan family. Nurse Jensen's statement was a handwritten account, signed and notarized, describing how she'd witnessed a hospital orderly switching the ID bracelets on 2 infant girls in the nursery. She'd been too afraid to report it immediately, fearing for her job. By the time guilt drove her to my grandmother, years had passed, and she had no proof beyond her word. The Blackwood family history folder contained newspaper clippings, photographs, and a detailed family tree. I stared at the faces of Elizabeth and Richard Blackwood, my biological parents. Elizabeth had my nose, the same high cheekbones. Richard had dark eyes like mine, so unlike the blue-eyed Morgans. Their deaths had made headlines. Blackwood heirs perish in private plane crash. The article mentioned that custody of their infant daughter, Catherine, would be determined by the courts, with Richard's cousin Martin as the likely guardian. Except Catherine Blackwood wasn't with the Blackwoods. She was with the Morgans. And Eleanor Morgan, me, should have been the one orphaned, the one to inherit the vast Blackwood fortune. The financial documentation folder revealed what had happened to that fortune. Martin Blackwood had indeed been named guardian of the non-existent Catherine. When no child appeared, presumably because the real Catherine was living as Eleanor Morgan, the courts had eventually declared Catherine legally dead, assuming she had been with her parents on the ill-fated flight, though not listed on the manifest. The entire Blackwood estate had passed to Martin. The final folder, surveillance reports, was the most disturbing. My grandmother had hired private investigators to track Martin Blackwood for years. The reports detailed his transformation from a middle management executive to one of the wealthiest men in the state. Photos showed a distinguished man in his 60s, silver-haired and tan, outside opulent homes, exclusive clubs, and corporate headquarters. The most recent report was dated just 3 months ago. Martin Blackwood was very much alive, very much enjoying the wealth that should have been mine. I sat back, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a case of babies accidentally switched at birth. If my grandmother's evidence was to be believed, this was an elaborate conspiracy to steal an inheritance. To steal a life. My life. I gathered everything back into the box, except for Alexander Reeves's contact information. I needed professional help to navigate what came next, because there was no question now. Something would come next. I'd been pushed aside and overlooked my entire life, made to feel inadequate by a family that wasn't even mine. It was time for Eleanor Morgan, no, Catherine Blackwood, to claim what was rightfully hers. "You should go to the police," was Alex Reeves's first piece of advice when I met him at his office the following day. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with the keen eyes of someone who noticed everything and the patient demeanor of someone used to dealing with people in crisis. And tell them what? That 30 years ago, babies were switched at a hospital that doesn't even exist anymore? That my grandmother, now dead, suspected foul play but kept it secret? That a nurse, also dead, claimed to witness something but never filed a report? I shook my head. They'd think I was crazy. Or just after the Blackwood money. Alex leaned back in his chair. "The evidence your grandmother compiled is compelling, but you're right, it's largely circumstantial. A criminal case would be difficult to prove after all this time. So, what are my options?" "Civil court," he said. "A lawsuit to establish your identity as Catherine Blackwood and claim your inheritance. We'd need DNA evidence, which we have, and ideally, we'd want to find the real Eleanor Morgan, the woman raised as Catherine Blackwood." I blinked. I hadn't even thought, there's another woman out there, isn't there? Someone who thinks she's Catherine Blackwood, who grew up as Martin's ward. Alex's expression darkened. "That's the strange thing. According to our investigation, there is no Catherine Blackwood. No record of Martin Blackwood raising a child. The court declared Catherine dead when she couldn't be produced after her parents' death. But that's impossible. If the babies were switched, the real Catherine, the biological daughter of the Morgans, must have gone somewhere." "Exactly. And finding her would go a long way toward proving your case." I thought about this unknown woman, my counterpart in this bizarre situation. Was she living a happy life somewhere, oblivious to her true origins? Or had something more sinister happened? "There's another complication," Alex continued. "The statute of limitations on fraud is generally around 5 to 6 years, depending on the jurisdiction. However, in cases where the fraud was actively concealed, the clock starts ticking when the victim discovers the fraud." "Which would be now," I said. "Exactly. But we'd have to prove that the fraud was deliberately concealed from you, not just that it occurred. Your grandmother's evidence suggests Martin Blackwood orchestrated the baby switch. If true, he's guilty of multiple felonies, identity fraud, theft, possibly even kidnapping. People have gone to extraordinary lengths to cover up smaller crimes. The implication was clear. If I pursued this, I might be putting myself in danger. I've spent my life feeling like I don't belong, I said quietly. Being compared to my high-achieving brother and perfect sister, always falling short, never understanding why I couldn't just be what my family wanted. Finding out I'm not actually related to them, it explains so much. I can't just ignore this. Alex nodded. Then we moved forward carefully. The first step is gathering more concrete evidence. Your grandmother's research is a starting point, but we need more. I suggest we locate any hospital staff still living who worked in the maternity ward that night. We should also run a more comprehensive DNA test, one that would stand up in court. And Martin Blackwood? Do we confront him? Not yet. Men like Blackwood have resources and connections. If he really did orchestrate this switch, he won't take kindly to you threatening his position. Before you go public with any claims, we need to build an airtight case. I left Alex's office with a plan and a strange, hollow feeling in my chest. The anger I'd expected to feel toward the Morgans hadn't materialized. Instead, I felt a profound sadness. They had raised me, loved me in their way, never knowing I wasn't biologically theirs. My mother's sighs of disappointment, my father's puzzled looks when I failed to follow in his academic footsteps, they'd never understood why I was so different because they couldn't. But Martin Blackwood, there was no confusion about my feelings toward him. If he had stolen me from my birthright, orchestrated a scheme that altered the course of my life, then he deserved whatever consequences came his way. I decided not to tell my family about the letter yet, not until I had more answers. Instead, I threw myself into the investigation, working closely with Alex to piece together the events of 30 years ago. We located a retired nurse who had worked at Meadowbrook General. She remembered the night vaguely. 2 babies born close together, one to a wealthy family who'd insisted on a private room and additional security. She couldn't confirm a switch, but she recalled an orderly who had been fired the following week for unspecified protocol violations. That orderly, Michael Kemp, had died in a car accident just months after being fired. Another dead end. Or perhaps something more sinister. The DNA test results came back, confirming again that I had no biological relationship to the Morgans. More importantly, they showed markers consistent with the limited genetic information we could find about the Blackwoods. We're building a case, Alex assured me. But we still need to find the real Eleanor Morgan, or at least determine what happened to her. That's the missing piece. We hired additional investigators to look into Martin Blackwood's activities around the time of my birth and in the years after. They uncovered a series of cash withdrawals from his accounts just before the switch, and property records for a remote cabin purchased under an LLC traced back to him. He owns a dozen properties, Alex said. But this one's strange. No one lives there. It's maintained by a caretaker who's paid through a series of shell companies. Our sources say no one visits it except Blackwood himself, a few times a year. You think this is connected to the real Eleanor? I asked. I think it's worth looking into anything unusual about a man we suspect of arranging a baby switch, and potentially much worse. The opportunity to investigate came sooner than expected. Our surveillance revealed that Martin Blackwood was planning a 3-week trip to Europe. His secluded cabin would be staffed only by the caretaker, who came 3 times a week. This is illegal, I pointed out as Alex outlined a plan to enter the property. Technically, yes. But if you really are Catherine Blackwood, then Martin has been illegally controlling your assets for decades. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to expose a greater crime. It was weak justification, but I agreed nonetheless. I needed answers, more than I needed moral clarity. The cabin was hardly a cabin at all, but a luxurious lodge nestled in the mountains 3 hours from the city. Alex and I waited until the caretaker's truck disappeared down the long driveway before approaching. The security system was state-of-the-art, but Alex had come prepared, having obtained the codes through means I decided not to question. Inside, the lodge was immaculate, gleaming hardwood floors, expensive furniture, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary or suspicious. "Let's split up," Alex suggested. "You take the upper floor, I'll check the ground level and basement." I climbed the curved staircase, feeling like an intruder despite the knowledge that, if my grandmother's evidence was correct, part of Martin Blackwood's fortune rightfully belonged to me. The upper floor contained 3 bedrooms and a study. The master suite was opulent but impersonal, like an upscale hotel room. The other 2 bedrooms were similarly anonymous. The study was different. Here, finally, were signs of personal use. Books on shelves, a desk with papers, a laptop that was unfortunately password protected. I took photos of everything, careful not to disturb the arrangement of items. A row of leather-bound ledgers caught my eye. They were dated, going back decades. I opened the most recent, finding page after page of notations in a precise hand. Dates, amounts, initials. Financial records of some kind, but coded in a way that wasn't immediately decipherable. I was photographing these when Alex called up from below. "Eleanor, you need to come down here." There was an urgency in his voice that made me hurry. I found him in the basement, standing before a heavy door with an electronic keypad lock. "I need help with this," he said. "It's a residential-grade vault door. I can bypass it, but I need an extra pair of hands." Working together, we managed to override the security system. The door swung open to reveal not a vault, but a room. A bedroom, meticulously decorated in soft pinks and greens, with a hospital-style bed in the center. Medical equipment lined one wall, monitors, oxygen tanks for stands. The room was unoccupied but clearly designed for someone who required constant care. "What is this?" I whispered, taking in the surreal scene. It was like a hospital room pretending to be a bedroom, or vice versa. Alex moved to a filing cabinet in the corner and began rifling through the folders inside. "Medical records," he said, pulling out a thick file. "For a patient identified only as Yem." My breath caught. "Eleanor Morgan?" It's possible. The records documented decades of care for a patient with severe cognitive and physical disabilities, the result of a traumatic brain injury sustained in infancy. Treatments, medications, therapies, all provided privately, all expensive, all hidden away in this secret room. If this is the real Eleanor Morgan, the biological daughter of your parents, then this changes everything, Alex said. It suggests that the baby's switch might not have been just about stealing the Blackwood inheritance. It might have been about hiding a tragedy. You think someone injured the real Eleanor and switched her with me to cover it up? It's a theory. The timing fits. And it would explain why there was never a Catherine Blackwood raised by Martin. If the real Eleanor was severely disabled, he couldn't present her as the healthy Blackwood heir. I felt sick imagining the scenario. A helpless infant injured, then hidden away for decades while an imposter unwittingly took her place.
Me.
I was that imposter. "We need to take these records," I said. "And we need to find out if Yem is still alive and where she is now." "The room is set up for use," Alex pointed out. "Someone is being cared for here, at least part-time." We continued our search, finding nursing schedules and care instructions. A nurse visited the lodge 3 times a week, the same days as the caretaker but at different times. According to the most recent notes, Yem had been transported to a medical facility for tests just 2 days ago and was scheduled to return tomorrow. "We can't be here when they bring her back," Alex said. "But we have enough to keep investigating. We can get the name of the medical facility from these transfer orders, approach this through proper channels." I nodded, still processing the implications of our discovery. As we were preparing to leave, making sure everything was exactly as we found it, I noticed a small leather-bound book tucked between the mattress and the bed frame. It would have been easy to miss. I pulled it out carefully. It was a journal. The handwriting inside was shaky, childlike, but recognizable as the same hand that had written the financial entries in the ledgers upstairs. The entries were simple, often just a few words. April 18th, bad day. No talking. April 22nd. Nurse says she knows me today. Progress. April 30th, said Martin clearly. First real word in months. The most recent entry was dated just 3 weeks ago. June 2nd, doctor says declining. Seizures increasing. Considering full-time facility care. Martin Blackwood has been personally caring for her, I said, showing Alex the journal. All these years, he's been coming here to look after her. Or to make sure his secret stays hidden, Alex countered. Either way, this is the evidence we needed. If Yem is the real Eleanor Morgan, and she suffered an injury that Martin Blackwood was responsible for, it would explain everything. The baby switch, the hidden inheritance, all of it. We photographed the journal and returned it to its hiding place. Then we erased all signs of our entry and left the property, both shaken by what we discovered. Back in the city, we worked through the night, planning our next steps. We need to establish the identity of Yem definitively, Alex said. If she's at a medical facility right now, that gives us an opportunity. A DNA sample would tell us if she's biologically related to the Morgans. You're talking about obtaining a medical sample without consent, I pointed out. That's crossing another line. At this point, I think we're beyond worrying about legal niceties. Someone, likely Martin Blackwood, engineered a baby switch to steal your inheritance and hide a crime. The normal rules don't apply anymore. I wasn't convinced, but I was running out of alternatives. The more we uncovered, the more complicated and disturbing the situation became. What if we went to my parents with what we know so far? I suggested. If Yem is their biological daughter, don't they have a right to know she exists? Alex hesitated. It's your decision. But consider this. Your family has no idea you're not their biological child. Dropping this bomb on them, especially when we don't have all the answers yet, could be traumatic for everyone involved. He was right. I couldn't go to them with half a story, with suspicions and theories, but no concrete proof. I needed to know exactly what had happened 30 years ago, and why. All right, I conceded. How do we get a DNA sample from Yem? Alex's plan was simple but risky. Using the information from the medical transfer orders, we identified the facility where Yem was being treated, a private neurological clinic known for its discretion and excellent care. Alex had contacts who could get us in, posing as medical researchers conducting a study on long-term brain injuries. It was a violation of medical ethics, legal boundaries, and my own moral code. But I agreed anyway. 2 days later, dressed in a borrowed lab coat with a convincing ID badge, I followed Alex into the exclusive clinic. His contact, a nurse named Diane who owed him a favor I didn't ask about, led us to a private room on the 3rd floor. 10 minutes, she warned. The patient just had a series of tests and is sleeping. Doctor makes rounds in 15. She left us alone with the unconscious woman in the hospital bed. I approached slowly, not sure what I expected to feel looking at the person who might have lived my life if things had been different. Yem was about my age, her face peaceful in sleep, but marked by the years. Her dark hair, streaked with premature gray, was cut short in a practical style. A feeding tube and various monitors connected her to machines that beeped softly. She looks like your mother, Alex said quietly. Patricia Morgan. I saw it too, the same chin, the same brow. Despite the ravages of whatever condition she suffered from, there was an unmistakable resemblance to the woman who had raised me. Alex worked quickly, swabbing the inside of Yem's cheek for a DNA sample, while I stood watch at the door. We were just finishing when Diane returned, urgency in her eyes. You need to go.
Now.
Blackwood is here. Martin Blackwood? I asked, heart racing. She nodded. He's the one who pays for all this. He's talking to the doctor down the hall, but he'll be here any minute. We slipped out through a service corridor, avoiding the main hallways. As we neared the exit, I caught a glimpse through a partially open door, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, his back to me as he spoke with a doctor in a white coat. Martin Blackwood, the man who had potentially orchestrated the theft of my identity and inheritance. My first instinct was to confront him then and there. Only Alex's firm grip on my arm stopped me. Not here, not now, he whispered, pulling me toward the exit. He was right, of course. A confrontation without proof would accomplish nothing. The DNA test took 3 days. 3 agonizing days of waiting, of imagining every possible outcome. When the results finally came back, they confirmed what we had begun to suspect. Yem was indeed biologically related to Patricia and Robert Morgan. She was the real Eleanor Morgan, which meant I was, beyond any doubt, Catherine Blackwood. We have enough now, Alex said as we reviewed all our evidence. DNA proof that you're not related to the Morgans. DNA proof that Yem is. Medical records showing a traumatic brain injury in infancy, followed by decades of secret care. Financial records that show Martin Blackwood has been using what should be your inheritance to pay for that care. But we still don't know exactly what happened, I pointed out. Why was Eleanor injured? Was it an accident that Martin covered up by switching us? Or something more deliberate? Alex's expression was grim. There's only one person who knows the full truth, and that's Martin Blackwood. And I think it's time you spoke with him directly. The Blackwood Foundation occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. Martin Blackwood's office, according to the directory, was on the highest floor. The receptionist looked skeptical when I requested a meeting without an appointment. Mr. Blackwood's schedule is fully booked for the next 3 months, she said, not even bothering to check. If you'd like to leave your information, someone will contact you to schedule a time. I placed a thick envelope on her desk. Please tell Mr. Blackwood that Catherine Blackwood is here to discuss Eleanor Morgan. Tell him I have DNA results he'll find interesting. Her professional smile faltered. I'm sorry, who did you say you are? Just deliver the message. He'll understand. I took a seat in the waiting area, ignoring the receptionist's uncertain glance as she picked up the phone. Alex and I had debated how to approach this moment. He had wanted to go through lawyers to file formal papers before any meeting. But I had insisted on a direct confrontation. I wanted to see Martin Blackwood's face when his 30-year secret was exposed. Less than 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and Martin Blackwood himself strode into the reception area. He looked exactly like his photographs, tall, distinguished, the picture of wealth and confidence. But now there was something else in his expression, tightly controlled panic. Ms. Morgan, he said, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. Why don't we speak in my office? I followed him into the elevator, which required his fingerprint to access the top floor. We rode in silence, the tension thick enough to touch. His office was a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He gestured to a sitting area with leather couches. Please sit. Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Water? I think we're beyond pleasantries, Mr. Blackwood, I said, remaining standing. I know who I am. I know about the woman you keep hidden at your lodge. I know what you did 30 years ago. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. And what exactly do you think you know? I know that I'm Catherine Blackwood, the daughter of Elizabeth and Richard Blackwood. I know that Eleanor Morgan is currently in a private neurological clinic receiving treatment for injuries she sustained as an infant. I know that you arranged to have us switched at birth to cover up whatever happened to her and to steal my inheritance. He didn't deny it. Instead, he walked to a cabinet, poured himself a drink, and took a long sip before speaking. You've been quite thorough in your investigation. Impressively so. But you've only uncovered part of the story. He gestured again to the couch. Please sit. If we're going to have this conversation, let's at least be civilized about it.
Reluctantly, he said.
He took the chair opposite me. What happened to Eleanor Morgan? I demanded. Did you hurt her? Pain flashed across his face. Genuine pain, not the calculated response I'd expected.
No.
I would never. She was just a baby. Then what happened? He finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. It was Richard, your father. He was watching Eleanor that night. Elizabeth was at a charity function. I was there too. Richard stayed home with the baby, with you, or who he thought was you. There was an accident. He'd had too much to drink, and he dropped her. She hit her head on the marble fireplace. I felt sick imagining it. Why not take her to the hospital?
He did.
That's where I found him, panicking in the emergency room while doctors tried to save his daughter's life. Richard was beside himself, terrified of what Elizabeth would do when she found out what had happened. Elizabeth had a temper, and their marriage was already strained. He begged me to help him find a way to keep it from her. So, you decided to steal another baby? Martin shook his head. That wasn't the initial plan.
We just wanted to buy time.
The doctors said the damage was severe, that Catherine might not survive the night. We decided to tell Elizabeth that the baby was being kept for observation, nothing serious, just a precaution. We thought we'd have time to figure out how to break the news gently. He stood, moving to the window. But then I saw the other baby in the nursery. Same general appearance, same age. The idea came to me suddenly, a terrible, unforgivable idea. Switch the babies. Give Elizabeth the healthy child, at least until we could figure out what to do. It was only supposed to be temporary. What went wrong? Everything. His voice was hollow. The injured baby, Eleanor, survived, but the doctors said she would never fully recover. She'd need constant care, possibly for life. And Elizabeth had already bonded with you, thinking you were Catherine. Richard was drinking more, consumed by guilt. I was the only one who knew the truth, the only one keeping this secret together. And then my parents, the Blackwoods, died in the plane crash, I said. He nodded. 3 months later. A cruel twist of fate. Suddenly you were an orphan. According to all records, you were Catherine Blackwood, sole heir to the family fortune. I was named your guardian in their will. But I couldn't produce you, because you were living as Eleanor Morgan with the Morgan family, who had no idea of the switch. So, you had Eleanor declared dead and took the inheritance for yourself. I took control of the inheritance, he corrected, every penny of which has gone to providing care for Eleanor Morgan. The best doctors, the best treatments, the best chance at some quality of life. Do you have any idea how expensive round-the-clock skilled nursing care is? How much specialized equipment and therapy costs? The Blackwood fortune was substantial, but 30 years of intensive medical care has depleted most of it. I hadn't expected this defense. In all my imagined confrontations, Martin Blackwood had been a villain motivated by greed. The idea that he'd spent my inheritance caring for the real Eleanor, it complicated things. Why keep it a secret all these years?
I asked.
Why not tell the Morgans the truth? Martin sighed deeply. The Morgans had already bonded with you. Patricia had suffered multiple miscarriages before finally having what she thought was a successful pregnancy. Could I really tell them that their daughter was severely brain damaged and living under my care? That the child they'd raised for years wasn't biologically theirs? I made a decision, right or wrong, to protect both families from a truth that would only cause more pain. I sat in silence, trying to process everything. The man I'd been ready to destroy wasn't the villain I'd constructed in my mind.
He was flawed, yes.
What he'd done was undeniably wrong. But his motives weren't what I'd imagined. Does Eleanor recognize you? I asked finally. Pain crossed his face. Sometimes. On her good days. She calls me Uncle Martin, as she did when she was a baby. Those moments, they're becoming rarer. What happens now?
I asked.
Now that I know the truth? Martin met my gaze directly. That depends on what you want, Catherine. You could take legal action, try to claim what remains of the Blackwood estate. You have the evidence. You could expose the whole story, destroy the Morgan family's understanding of who they are, who you are. Or we could find a different solution. One that honors your birthright without causing unnecessary pain to people who are innocent in all this. I thought of the Morgans, the family that had raised me. They had been distant, yes, often disappointed in me, but they had loved me in their way. Learning that I wasn't their biological child would devastate them. And what about the real Eleanor, lying in that hospital bed, dependent on care that Martin had been providing for decades? I need time, I said, standing. Time to decide what to do with all this. Martin nodded. Of course. But there's one more thing you should know. He walked to his desk and retrieved a manila envelope. Your grandparents, Elizabeth's parents, left these for their grandchild. Your grandmother Ruth wasn't the only one who suspected the truth. Inside the envelope were letters, photographs, and a small velvet box containing a diamond pendant. Elizabeth wore this on her wedding day, Martin explained. Her mother wanted her daughter to have it. And now it belongs to you. Tears filled my eyes as I fastened the necklace around my throat. For the first time, I felt a connection to the biological family I'd never known, a precious link to the past that had been stolen from me. 2 months later, I stood outside the Morgan family home, gathering courage for what I was about to do. After much soul-searching and many long conversations with Alex, I had made my decision. I would not expose the baby's switch publicly. I would not sue for the Blackwood inheritance or seek to punish Martin legally. Instead, I had worked with Martin to establish a trust in my biological parents' names. The Elizabeth and Richard Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to funding neurological research and care for patients like Eleanor. Martin had signed over what remained of the estate, and I would serve as the foundation's director. But first, I had to tell my family the truth. They deserved to know about their biological daughter, to decide for themselves whether they wanted to meet her, to be part of her care in whatever time she had left. My mother opened the door, surprise crossing her face. Eleanor, we weren't expecting you. Your brother's not here. He's at a conference in Boston. I'm not here to see James, I said. I need to talk to you and Dad. There's something important I have to tell you. As I followed her into the familiar living room, I touched the diamond pendant at my throat, drawing strength from it. I wasn't Eleanor Morgan anymore, but I wasn't quite Catherine Blackwood either. I was someone new, a person forged through revelation and choice. I had been raised by one family and born to another. I had inherited 2 legacies, one of blood and fortune, one of upbringing and shared history. I didn't have to choose between them. I could honor both, creating something meaningful from the broken pieces of this extraordinary story. The truth would bring pain, yes, but it would also bring healing, clarity, and the chance for a new beginning, not just for me, but for everyone whose lives had been altered by one fateful night 30 years ago. As my parents sat down, expectant and unaware that their world was about to change forever, I took a deep breath and began to tell them a story about 2 baby girls born on the same night and the unimaginable consequences that followed.